Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. The victim of a brutal attack and hostage-taking speaks to Bridge City News. Plus, nearly 400 firefighters head to the blaze burning in the Okanagan. And China conducts missile strikes off the coast of Taiwan following Nancy Pelosi's visit.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks for joining us. It's been almost 1 month since a 54-year-old woman was taken hostage inside the Lethbridge Legal Guidance Office downtown. In a special interview with Bridge City News, Angela Stewart had the chance to sit down with Catherine Linder on the events and injuries she sustained on that frightful day.
I looked down and my shirt was drenched in blood.
Days are quiet now for Catherine Linder. Reading her books and spending time with family is how this Lethbridge woman is recovering following the traumatic events that transpired on July 14th. That Thursday afternoon was business as usual for Catherine.
I was on the phone with somebody. The person walked in the office. She was a client.
Catherine says the woman who approached her asked to speak to a specific lawyer, but that lawyer was unavailable.
That seemed to agitate her a little bit. I got up and talked to her. She asked if she could use the bathroom.
Just minutes later, the suspect came out of the bathroom and pointed a gun at both Catherine and the other employee.
And said she wanted to speak to this lawyer now or she was going to kill us.
Catherine escorted the suspect to a back room where she could speak to the lawyer on the phone in private.
So I walked behind the desk to put the phone on speaker. She closed the door behind us, but then she pushed the 2 chairs up against the door and I went, oh.
During this time, police had arrived on scene and a negotiator was patched through. Catherine was told to hang up on them twice.
The third time when they called back, I answered the phone. She looked at me. She said, "Why did you do that?"
Asked to get down on her knees and turn around, the suspect drew a gun on Catherine for a second time.
And I said, "You don't want to do this." And she looked at me and she said the same thing. So I did, and I was kind of leaned like this up against a filing cabinet. So I just stood up a little straighter and looked her in the eye. Didn't say anything, but I thought to myself, if you're going to hurt me, you're going to look me in the eye when you do it.
Catherine says the woman began to come at her, and she remembers trying to push her back.
It happened so fast. I was trying to push her away. She came at me. I think I screamed and ducked like this. But she probably had already got my throat, obviously, if I ducked my head.
She remembers seeing police pulling the woman off of her and looking down, seeing her shirt drenched in blood. Catherine sustained life-threatening injuries to her neck, a wound to her thumb, as well as cuts to the back of her neck. She spent about 8 days in the hospital. During her time in that room, Catherine says the woman had an end goal.
That's what she told me. She wanted to die. She didn't think she could do it herself, so her end goal was my life was more valuable than hers. So if she hurt me, they would kill her. And that would be the end of it.
Courtney Louise Shaw has been charged with attempted murder, among other charges, in relation to the taking. Her court case was adjourned Wednesday until September 1st. She also remains in custody.
I hope that they get her the help she needs, that she doesn't see the light of day for a very, very long time. She seriously needs a lot of help.
Catherine says she isn't sure when she will return to work, but for now, she's taking some much-needed time off to heal. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
Thank you, Angela. Powerful story. Well, Thursday, we brought you the story of the Stephan family whose application to the Supreme Court was denied. They were asking the court to have the law changed so the parents would not be criminally held responsible for treating their sick children with natural remedies or choosing not to vaccinate. The Southern Alberta couple were charged with failing to provide the necessaries of life after their 18-month-old son, Ezekiel, died of meningitis in 2012. David Stephan says after he and his wife Colette were acquitted of the charges, the Alberta Court of Appeal tried to resurrect the case from a different angle: vaccination.
That was what was really peculiar, is that the Alberta Court of Appeal suddenly brought this issue up out of the blue, saying that basically, the vaccines would have saved Ezekiel's life, and they weren't relying on any expert testimony whatsoever to come up with that. So it's interesting that a panel of 3 judges, including the top judge in Alberta being the Chief Justice of the Alberta Appeal Court, that they would suddenly just pull that information out of their hat arbitrarily as if they were medical experts having medical evidence before them, when in reality they didn't have the evidence before them. They didn't have the Crown asking for it, and yet they brought it up. And so that was what was peculiar, is that the Alberta Court of Appeals made the vaccine issue a live issue again, and that was one of the main reasons that we were going to the Supreme Court, to try to get that issue rectified, so that suddenly this isn't like a case that is basically like having vaccine mandates.
Months after the case was reopened by the Alberta Court of Appeal, the Crown dropped the charges. This was around the same time that a key witness, former Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Bamadil Ediegbo, was being tried in the U.S. for credential fraud. The BC Wildfire Service says almost 400 firefighters are now assigned to the blaze burning southwest of Penticton in the southern Okanagan. A flare-up yesterday forced the Regional District of Okanagan Similkameen to order the entire community of Olala to evacuate, affecting about 400 people, while the village of Kiramios and surrounding areas are on evacuation alert. Highway 38, which runs through Olala and connects Kiramios to Caledine, is also closed until further notice. Hundreds more homes are also on evacuation order or alert due to the blaze, which was sparked last Friday and now covers about 42 square kilometers, threatening homes and properties as far west as the Apex Mountain Resort. A $228,000 bonus given to Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, last year during the pandemic has prompted the provincial government to order a change in the rules for such payouts. Finance Minister Jason Nixon says the public service should not be able to unilaterally approve payments of that size. Nixon says he's ordered a full review of the policy to ensure that future bonus payments for emergencies go through Cabinet for approval. The NDP and public sector unions have called the payout an insult to frontline healthcare workers as the province tried to reduce their pay during the pandemic. The United Conservative government has canceled an emergency directive that called for some patients in Edmonton hospitals to be treated in hallways. The order was enacted to reduce pressure on emergency departments while Alberta Health Services worked to place some patients in other hospitals. The province says it was dealing with high demand, staffing shortages, and higher numbers of patients due to COVID. The opposition NDP says the government contributed to the staffing shortages by tearing up the master contract with doctors and fighting at one point to cut nurses' salaries. As Alberta's United Conservative Party is looking to replace its leader, many are stepping up to put their name forward on the ballot. In addition to Travis Taves, former Wild Rose leader Danielle Smith is one of them. But some UCP members say may not be too forgiving from when she left the Conservative Party to cross the floor to the Wild Rose Party. Well, I had a chance to speak with Danielle Smith recently, and she says she made a mistake in doing that.
There's no question it was a mistake in 2015, and I ended up losing my nomination, and Jim Prentice ended up losing the election. I think people now can begin to see that part of what we were trying to do is to bring unity to the Conservative movement. I mean, we did it the wrong way, and the public wasn't ready for it at that time. But now I'm hearing is fear that the unity that we brought, that Jason Kenney and Brian Jean brought by bringing the party together, is going to bust apart. I don't want to see that happen. I know Brian Jean doesn't want to see that happen. It's why both of us have jumped into this race, is that we want to keep this movement together. Both of us gave up an awful lot for unity, and I believe that the UCP project is one that's worth saving.
You can catch my full interview with Danielle Smith coming up following business news. Meanwhile, former Alberta Children's Services Minister Rebecca Schultz is also running to become the new leader of the UCP. She says that she has what it takes to unite the Conservatives as our new premier. Schultz also says when it comes to healthcare, she has a solid plan.
Primary care has to be a priority in terms of how we recruit physicians, coming up with innovative and unique ways to get more young people from rural communities getting into med school and coming back and serving as a family doc in their local community. I think there is a lot that can be done there. and working with different areas across the province, because the needs in Lethbridge may not be the same as in Bonnyville, for example, right? So we have a really good opportunity ahead of us to work with those communities and get more family docs in the system.
Catch the full in-depth interview with UCP leadership hopeful Rebecca Schultz coming up in the second half of the show. The UCP will choose its new leader on October 6th. Unions representing hospital workers are calling on the Ontario government to provide more safety and mental health supports and offer more financial incentives to help with retention and hiring. 10 hospitals have had to temporarily close emergency departments since June due to a lack of nurses.
We have heard from Premier Ford that he claims that Ontarians have access to the care they needed. I'm here to tell you that's simply untrue. We're here today to call again for this government to take immediate steps like yesterday, to keep the nurses we have, bring back the nurses who have left their jobs, and bring on board new nurses. This starts with repealing Bill 124. In my opinion, it's the root cause. Restoring our collective bargaining so that nurses and healthcare professionals can be compensated fairly and be shown the respect that they have more than earned.
An Ontario health executive says the system is experiencing staffing strain and unprecedented levels, and as healthcare workers leave the field due to burnout and retirements. But Dr. Chris Simpson believes the situation may improve in the coming weeks as the current wave of COVID recedes. Meanwhile, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says the party wants to see immediate action to legislate a higher standard of care in long-term care homes across Canada. The Liberals promised to draft legislation during the last election, and that promise is a condition of the party's confidence and supply agreement with the NDP to prevent an election before 2025.
The fact that we, when compared to the rest of the world, had some of the worst outcomes for seniors in Canada, a G7 nation, which prides itself on our healthcare system, that simply can't continue. So our goal ultimately is that we no longer see seniors bearing the brunt of any sort of healthcare crisis. We want to see that seniors receive the best care possible. And so that's ultimately our goal. And we want to see the quickest implementation of the best qualities and best standards, best quality of care and best standards, so that we can prevent any losses moving forward. But we also want to make sure that it's not just the legislated standard of care, but also some of the things that I've outlined. We need to make sure that there's sufficient workers. And that means making sure we have good conditions of work and appropriate levels of hiring of nurses and other healthcare workers.
The Greater Toronto Airport Authority says the situation at Pearson International Airport continues to improve with fewer flight delays and shorter wait for baggage compared with previous weeks. The GTAA's president and CEO Deborah Flint says 44% of flights were on time last week, up from an average of 35% over the 4 weeks previous.
Our data, it shows that we are improving week over week. Airline on-time performance across the airport increased to 44% of all flights being on time. This is not a number that I would normally tout at all, but given where we have been for the last 4 weeks and even before that, improving from 35% is substantial. Our partners at CATSA have hired hundreds of new employees to screen here at Pearson, and that is making a difference to lineups. The latest statistics that CATSA has provided indicate that 82% of passengers are now being screened in less than 15 minutes.
The federal cabinet is going to use a regulatory measure to fast-track a ban on the import of handguns, which will remain in effect until legislation is passed in Parliament. A woman who survived the 1989 shooting at Montreal's École Polytechnique says this is a significant and creative measure that will unquestionably slow the expansion of the Canadian handgun market until Bill C-21 is adopted, hopefully this fall. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino says the ban will take effect in 2 weeks.
I'm proud to announce that our government has decided to ban the importation of handguns. Through a regulatory mechanism enacted by my colleague, Minister Joly, nearly all individuals and businesses in Canada will be banned from importing handguns on a go forward. Given that nearly all our handguns are imported, this means that we're bringing our national handgun freeze into effect even sooner. Our hope is that this temporary measure, one that is made moot should and when Parliament passes Bill C-21, along with the amendments to the regulations under the Firearms Act, as they hope they will. But in the meantime, this announcement is further proof of our commitment to leave no stone unturned in our quest to prevent gun crime in our country.
Canada imported $26.4 million worth of pistols and revolvers in the first 6 months of this year, up 52% from a year ago. China conducted precision missile strikes off of Taiwan's coast as part of military exercises after a visit by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The drills were intended to advertise China's threat to attack Taiwan, which is a self-governing island republic. Beijing claims Taiwan as its own territory to be annexed by force if necessary. 5 of the missiles fired by China landed in Japan's exclusive economic zone. Here's a fun little story, especially if you remember the TV show. Reservations are getting scooped up fast at the newly opened The Golden Girls Kitchen in Beverly Hills. 30 years after The Golden Girls ended its run on NBC, a bistro has been transformed into the set of the sitcom about 4 women living in Miami. The pop-up restaurant opened on July 30th, which the internet has labeled National Golden Girls Day.
Personally, when I'm picking through an IP to do a pop-up in, you look for staying power, right? The Golden Girls is on Hallmark, syndicated for how long now? It's streaming now on Hulu. It's like, and it's just so synonymous. You see any of those women, you're like, Golden Girls. We created the kitchen, which is an iconic moment. But then we have little moments like this, neon right here. Thank you for being in front. People love it. It's all over Instagram. And then Blanche's bedroom has been such a big moment. Like we were creating this. We're like, what is the Instagrammable moment? And you think about it. Whenever you see that print, you think Blanche. You think Golden Girl. So we knew we had to do it.
I think a lot of people just love the fact that I think they were ahead of their time as far as like the jokes and things that they make.
I just love their friendship, and I think it's reflected with women in general. I think that we really love to have groups of friends that we feel comfortable with and have fun with and laugh with.
I definitely want to pay that place a visit. I loved that show back in the day. Well, it was a beautiful sunny day here in southern Alberta, albeit a bit cooler than what we've been experiencing, reaching only a high of 23 degrees, but that may have been a much needed reprieve for some. We'll see those temperatures soar once again soon enough. I will have all those details coming up in my weather report right after the break. Welcome back. A bit of a cooler than seasonal day, but that's all about to change. Saturday, we are looking at a beautiful 26-degree day. Lots of sunshine before we start to really soar in the temperatures. That mercury is definitely going to rise again up to 29 on Sunday, 31 degrees expected on Monday, up to 29 again on Tuesday. And then look at that to round out our 7-day forecast. Wednesday and Thursday, high of 34 degrees. So it's that cool off period did not last long. It's about to get real hot real soon again. Average high for this time of year, 26. Average low, 11 degrees, 38 was our high temperature on this day back in 1961. And in 2006, we had our chilliest, which was 4 degrees, 6:07. That is when the sun rose this morning, and our daylight ends today at 9:07 p.m., giving us exactly 15 hours of daylight. We're soon going to be in that 14-hour time. So those days are very slowly getting shorter. 26 on the coast tomorrow in Victoria, 24 in Vancouver, 24 also expected in Edmonton tomorrow under sunny skies. And a beautiful day in Calgary tomorrow, high of only 23 degrees, and that's a little bit lower than their average high for this time of year as well. 22 the high in Saskatoon tomorrow with partly cloudy skies. 19 only the high in both Regina and Winnipeg. Winnipeg seeing some wind gusts from 30 to 50 kilometers per hour and a bit of cloud coverage there as well. Now, as for the central part of the country and the Maritimes, we're looking at heat warnings everywhere. So heat warning in effect for Toronto, 31 the high there. Showers expected, possibility of a of a thunderstorm there. 31 also in Ottawa, 33 expected to be the high in Montreal with lots of sunshine there. Same thing out here in the east. We're talking heat warnings everywhere with high humidexes, 35 sometimes. 30 degrees the high in Fredericton. Clearing off though later on in the day. Expected to be kind of cloudy to start the day there. 30 degrees in Halifax under showers there. 28 in Charlottetown and 26 degrees the high in St. John's, Newfoundland. Showers expected there as well. So there you have it. That is your forecast. Canada's unemployment rate remained at a historic low of 4.9% in July, even though the economy shed jobs for the second straight month. Stats Canada says the economy lost 31,000 jobs last month on top of a loss of 43,000 in June. But it says Canada's labor market remains exceptionally tight with over 1 million job vacancies across the country. CIBC senior economist Andrew Grantham notes the job losses in July were concentrated in the services sector, including wholesale and retail, education and health sectors, which are reporting high vacancy rates. Grantham says that this indicates labor supply rather than demand appears to be the main issue. TELUS is reporting its second quarter net income increased by 45% from a year earlier to $498 million. The gain comes as the Vancouver telecommunications firm added 93,000 net new mobile phone subscribers and 34,000 net new internet service customers. TELUS reported a $422 million profit on an adjusted basis, up more than 21% from the second quarter in 2021. Its revenue rose to $4.4 billion from $4.1 billion a year earlier. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 43 points on the day to finish at 19,620. The Dow was up 76 to 32,803. The S&P 500 was down 6 points to 4145, and the Nasdaq was down 63 points to 12,657. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 47 cents to 89.01 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 6 cents to 8.06 US. Gold was down $15.78 to $17.7550 US per ounce, and silver was down 28 cents to $19.90 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $10.83 per bushel, barley is at $8.01, canola is at $19.16, and corn is at $10.54 per bushel. Live cattle were up 18 cents to $137.88. Feeder cattle were up 45 cents to $179.53. Lean hogs were up 18 cents to $120.83, and the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 77.33 US.
Recapping one of our top stories today, hundreds of homes in BC's southern Okanagan Valley are on evacuation order or alert due to a blaze which was sparked last Friday and now covers about 42 square kilometers, threatening homes and properties as far west as the Apex Mountain Resort. The BC Wildfire Service says almost 400 firefighters are now assigned to the blaze burning southwest of Penticton. A flare-up yesterday forced the entire community of Olela to evacuate, affecting about 400 people, while the village of Karamios and surrounding areas are on evacuation alert. Up next, Alberta's United Conservative Party will choose their new leader in October. Bridge City News sat down with frontrunner Danielle Smith to get her perspective on the Alberta Sovereignty Act, healthcare in our province, and unity in the party. That's coming up right after this short break. By the way, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Alberta's United Conservative Party leadership race is becoming somewhat of a crowded field these days. We're going to be interviewing as many of the candidates as we can to give you an idea of where they're coming from. Today, we are joined by Danielle Smith. She is the former leader of the Wild Rose Party and now a candidate in the UCP leadership. We're so happy to have her on. Welcome to Bridge City News today, Danielle. Great to have you here.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. So Danielle, you're getting some praise at the same time, heaps of criticism over your promise to implement the Alberta Sovereignty Act. If you end up becoming premier, can you explain what this Sovereignty Act would actually do?
It's a pretty simple piece of legislation. It would just basically be reasserting our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and reasserting that the Constitution matters and that our provincial jurisdiction under Section 92 has to be respected. Unfortunately, we've got a federal government that is lawless. They have acted like the Charter doesn't exist, and they acted like the Constitution doesn't exist. And it's created a lot of uncertainty. We've had multiple projects that have been canceled because they can't see the way through to the finish line because they don't know how to get through the regulatory process, which has been made even more cumbersome by the federal government. This would just be asserting that we've got the right to develop our natural resources. It's been established in the Constitution. And we also have the right to protect our citizens from government overreach. And so it would be on a case-by-case basis that we would invoke it. But by declaring that we would pass the Alberta Sovereignty Act, we're just drawing a line in the sand. We're telling Ottawa to stay in its lane, and if they don't, we're going to push them out.
Okay, so Danielle, but critics are arguing that this is unconstitutional and that you can't really enforce it, considering that the federal government has its own tools to fight back, including withholding transfer funds from Alberta.
I guess what I would like is for Ottawa to treat us with the same respect as Quebec. And I'll give a few examples of the way in which provinces have asserted their constitutional rights. So, for instance, when the Emergencies Act was passed, and we now are beginning to see with the hearings that there was no justification for it, Quebec held an emergency session of their assembly and said, we're not going to enforce that here. We should have done the same. When they started seizing bank accounts, we should have encouraged people to move their money over to credit unions and said, sorry, that's against our constitutional rights. We are not enforcing that. I suspect that in the fall, we're going to see new mandates come in from the federal level. And I've heard loud and clear, especially from moms who are concerned about their kids. They do not want their kids forced back into any kind of restrictions. And if they put pressure on us, we'll just say, no, we're not going to enforce that. British Columbia has just recently said they're not going to enforce the laws on hard drugs. They, for years, didn't enforce the legislation around our criminal code legislation around possession and use of drugs, and now they've extended it to heroin and crystal meth and fentanyl with the government's blessing. So it seems to me we've got lots of precedent for different provinces to say, you know what, we have a different culture here. We want to enforce our laws in a different way here, and we're just asking for Alberta to be treated the same, and we're going to assert that we will be.
Okay, well, the UCP obviously seems to be deeply divided. So how do you propose to bring the party together?
There's I think a couple of issues that have caused us to lose support. One of them was the fact that we took a 180-degree turn from what we said we were going to do on vaccine mandates and vaccine passports. We'd gone so far as to change the public health legislation, saying we would never force anyone to get vaccinated. And then they ended up changing their mind in September. I think that caused a permanent lack of trust. And that would be one thing I would say is there's another way when we get into respiratory virus season to better protect our seniors. We won't be locking down again. We won't be firing people from their jobs because they've made a certain medical choice. In fact, I'd go so far as to amend the Human Rights Act to make sure that people cannot be discriminated against on the basis of medical choice or their political opinions. I think that will win back one portion. The other part of the problem has been all of these autonomy groups that have started up, whether it's the Buffalo Project or whether it's the Alberta Prosperity Project or the Wild Rose Independence Party, they're frustrated that we haven't acted on the mandate that we were given to end equalization. And from what I have seen over the past 20 years, we keep on arguing that we need to assert ourselves more like Quebec, collect our own income tax, collect our own pension, collect our own employment insurance, have our own police service. And we've got to start acting on those things, and we'll win that part of the party back as well. So this is why I've taken such a strong position that people want to see us act. They don't want to see us write stern letters. They don't want to see us continue to fight things through the courts that have been stacked by Ottawa appointees and seem to always go against us. They want to see us respect the Constitution, assert our rights, and demand to have the same respect as Quebec does in our federation. That's what we need to do to be able to win those votes back.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Danielle, many people believe that Jason Kenney lost the confidence of the party over the way that he handled the COVID pandemic. So you're saying that under your leadership, there would be no provincial lockdowns, and you're saying no to mandatory vaccinations. But Kenney made similar promises and then gave in to the pressure, I guess, to change. So why should voters believe that with you it will be different?
I've been watching this unfold over the last 2 years, and I've been looking at the politicians who did have the courage to stand up in the face of pressure, like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Governor of South Dakota Kristi Noem. You can look at, I don't understand why there's been such suppression of the full range of discussion around what our medical options are, but we now know after 2 years that we do have options. Focus protection should always have been the approach. I think what we will see once we start looking at the jurisdictions around the world that did the best, and Alberta did pretty well, it was because we did a better job than other jurisdictions of making sure our folks in long-term care were protected. And so that's the approach that we take, not preventing kids from going to school or preventing people from going to restaurants or forcing them and coercing them to take vaccines. We've got to protect those who are most vulnerable. So make sure that we do that in our nursing homes, make sure that we've got effective therapeutics so that when somebody does get diagnosed with COVID, they can have a treatment to prevent them from deteriorating and going into hospital. That should have been the approach over the last year and a half, and that will be the approach when we get into the fall respiratory virus season.
Okay, so you obviously have very different ideas on how to handle the future pandemic issues should they arise, and how to deal with healthcare issues. Will MLAs be able to voice their opinions freely, or will they have to toe the line?
I believe in the individual autonomy of MLAs. I think part of what happens with caucus solidarity is when you have members pass policy on certain issues, you kind of expect that if you're going to run for the party, that you're going to endorse what the members say. There was no policy on emerging issues, especially around COVID. And instead, we didn't actually listen to our MLAs. If we had, we probably would have taken slightly different approaches in Calgary and Edmonton versus our rural areas. We saw in other jurisdictions like BC and Ontario that they did have a more nuanced approach with fewer restrictions in outlying areas. And if we had done that, I think we would have been able to have a better balance. So I would say that the only way you get that feedback is if MLAs are able to go out into their community, do town halls, bring that feedback back to caucus, and make sure that those senior leadership is listening to it. When I was a leader the last time, we always relied on our MLAs to tell us what was going on in the community. And it wasn't just a wild rose concept. That's how Ralph Klein and Peter Lougheed operated as well. They made sure that if they were going to pass something, that they had buy-in on the caucus. Because if you can't convince your caucus, you're not going to be able to convince the general public either. So I think that's been a missing piece, but we would certainly bring that back.
Okay, Albertans are frustrated with the federal government's position on oil and gas. So what would you do to create a better playing field for the energy sector?
I'm going to look at this from a constitutional perspective. If you look at our constitution, we have the exclusive right to develop our resources. And Ottawa has been interfering in our jurisdiction every step of the way. We recently got a judgment from the Court of Appeal saying that their Bill C-69, which is, we've been calling it the No More Pipelines Act, but it's kind of the No More Build Anything Anywhere Act. They've said that goes way too far. So we would push them back on that, continue with the court litigation. But more importantly, we've got to start acting independently. And I want people to be in the mindset of the fact that we do have the sovereign right to make these decisions over our resources. And what would we do if we didn't have Ottawa standing in our way? I would say that what we would do is we would start developing economic corridors with our partners. The one that is the furthest along in development is from Fort McMurray to Churchill. Partner with our First Nations, partner with Saskatchewan and Manitoba. We own most of that land anyway because it was transferred to us as Crown land. Develop a 10-kilometer wide right-of-way, build rail infrastructure, build water and electricity infrastructure, bring heating and broadband to those communities, and then also build oil and gas pipelines. And that would be the way that we would get to one port. We can also do something similar, working with our First Nations to get to Thunder Bay, to Tuktoyaktuk in the north, to Port of Prince Rupert. And that, to me, is the way that Alberta can assert itself as the leader on economic development in Western Canada. And I'm not going to wait until Ottawa approves that. I'm going to work with our partners and make sure that we start working on those corridors. We've been talking about it since the 1930s. It's time to start acting on it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Danielle, what about healthcare? Should we keep throwing money at it, or while wait times and physicians availability, they don't seem to be improving? So are you open to making some kind of private healthcare part of the equation, or what's your take on that?
The main thing we need to do, and I think people want to make changes to healthcare that fall under the umbrella of the Canada Health Act, and I'm perfectly happy to do that. The issue that we have in healthcare is we've got way too many administrators and bureaucrats who are preventing dollars from flowing down to the front line. So I want to return to having individual hospital boards with funding following the patient to those facilities to create a motivation for our hospitals to figure out ways that they can deliver more services and get rewarded for it. I also want to see health spending accounts. It's a kind of concept that many businesses use where they give their workers a little bit of money so that they can pay for all the things that aren't covered by healthcare. A lot of people that I've spoken with who want vaccine choice, they also use alternative medicine to keep themselves well. They use massage therapists and physiotherapy and chiropractic. They want to go to counselors and therapists and dietitians. None of that is covered right now. So let's help people with a little bit of money so that they can take care of their conditions at the front end so that we don't end up with so many people in hospital because of chronic conditions that have been allowed to get acute. We need a major transformation in who makes the decisions and who gets the money, and we've got to start squeezing out those management layers. So I'm prepared to do that transformation. We've got to get started on that too.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, along that same vein, there's been a very tense relationship between the provincial government and doctors. So what would you do to change this situation?
We've got to realize our fight is not with the frontline operators. It's not the doctors that we should be fighting with, not the paramedics, not the nurses. They're just as frustrated, I think, with the level of bureaucratic interference and them being able to do their job. They're just as frustrated with the mismanagement. They're just as frustrated in not having the resources on the front line. So I think that we can have very positive relationship with our front line, get more dollars to them so that we can hire more doctors, we can attract more nurses back into the profession. We can make sure that our paramedics aren't sitting for an entire shift at hospital waiting rooms because they can't offload patients. These are all management issues. And so if we work together on solving those management issues, I am confident that we will repair a relationship with the front line and get better service for patients.
Okay, and then as far as law enforcement goes, do you believe, Danielle, that it's a good idea for Alberta to have its own police force? Is it worth the extra financial cost?
Yes, and I would start it immediately for a couple of reasons. We've had a lot of our frontline officers who've been fired from their jobs or put on leave because they refused to enforce some of the draconian decisions that have come down. I talked to an RCMP officer who was supposed to be on the crew that went and arrested Pastor Coates, and he refused to do that. That's the kind of person that I want in law enforcement, somebody who will value religious rights, someone who will value our charter rights. He also chose not to be vaccinated, and that is his right as a person who has bodily autonomy. So those are the kind of people that I want to see have jobs in law enforcement so that we can change the culture of law enforcement. One of the things that I hear frustration with in rural Alberta is the length of time it takes for our current officers to get out to calls when there's property damage or vandalism or theft. That would be a way in which our Alberta Provincial Police could augment the law enforcement. And then I also hear frustration in our big cities. We've got so many of our calls that are being responded to are mental health calls, are addiction calls, and we need a force that can better connect people who are in that kind of distress with the health system and the services that they need to be able to get clean from drugs so that they can get back into having a normal, independent life. And I think that if we train our Alberta Provincial Police officers in a high level of soft skills and negotiation and the ability to respond to those mental health calls, they'll be able to act as an additional service to where we're having problems in our big city centers. So I don't think there's any reason to delay. And I think that they'll do such a good job that we'll be able to expand that service out. But we've got to also get started by beginning that force so that we can take control over our own policing. And we know that we've got a police agency that responds to the priorities of Alberta.
So many more questions I'd like to get to, which we're running out of time, but I do want to fit one more in. Danielle, you have admitted that you made a mistake back when you were leading the Wild Rose Party and crossed the floor to the Progressive Conservatives. So what vibes are you getting from the current UCP members? Are they willing to forgive and forget and move on, or what are you getting?
Well, there's no question it was a mistake in 2015, and I ended up losing my nomination, and Jim Prentice ended up losing the election. I think people now can begin to see that part of what we were trying to do is to bring unity to the Conservative movement. I mean, we did it the wrong way, and the public wasn't ready for it at that time. But now I'm hearing is fear that the unity that we brought, that Jason Kenney and Brian Jean brought by bringing the party together, is going to bust apart. I don't want to see that happen. I know Brian Jean doesn't want to see that happen. It's why both of us have jumped into this race, is that we want to keep this movement together. Both of us gave up an awful lot for unity, and I believe that the UCP project is one that's worth saving. I think that we can be unified as a conservative movement, and if we do bust apart, we're going to end up with another 4 years or 8 years of NDP government, and I don't want to see that. When the NDP came in, investment in the province stopped. We had a ton of job loss. We saw an escalation in spending, an escalation in debt, and we're just now back into surplus. I want to make sure that we can maintain some conservative values in how we manage those resources on behalf of taxpayers, and also do a better job of delivering those frontline care programs. So that's the reason why I'm in the race, is to be a force of unity, and I'm glad to be getting some of the positive feedback that I am, because I think it's time to make a change so we can put Alberta first.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Danielle. Good luck in your campaign.
My pleasure.
Alberta's United Conservative Party leadership race is heating up. Now, the party will be choosing its new leader to replace Premier Jason Kenney on October the 6th. One of those candidates vying for the Premier seat is Rebecca Schultz, who left her UCP cabinet post as Minister of Children's Services to enter the leadership race. Rebecca, welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. So what sparked your interest in running to become the new leader of the UCP and potentially the new Premier of Alberta?
You know, I just feel so strongly about the future of our province, and I know that the success of our United Conservative Party is key to the future of our province. I think that, you know, as we travel across the province, and what I've been hearing from people is that there are a number of things going really well right now. Our economy is good. There are lots of jobs. Unemployment is down. You know, but people also want to see a slightly different change in tone when it comes to the government, and they want to make sure that the government hears their voices, that they've got a voice at the decision-making table. And, you know, I think we really need to stay focused on being hopeful and optimistic for our future, but also recognizing that people have some very real concerns right now, whether that be affordability or healthcare or education. And so, you know, that's really the voice that I try to bring to the table. I want to be completely honest. I want to show humility, not just talk about it, admit when we've made some mistakes, and show Albertans that we're here to work for them, to listen to them, and that we hear, you know, what's top of mind for them as well.
You know, you just mentioned kind of why card-carrying members should vote for you, but what's one thing specifically that makes you stand out or different from all the other candidates in the field?
You know, I would say it is my ability to communicate with people. I think we need somebody going into that next election who can, in fact, take on Rachel Notley and the NDP. That is our opponent as Conservatives. It's not each other, even though we've been through a very difficult couple of years. I think people want to see that shift in tone. You know, I chose Alberta. I'm originally from Saskatchewan. And so when people say 4 years of an NDP government was really hard here in Alberta, I say try 16. You know, any room I go into across Alberta, there are a number of people who came from another province or another place. And generally speaking, they came to Alberta for opportunity, for that promise that if you can work hard, you can be whoever and whatever you want to be and chart your own path. And I think people are looking for that optimism, that different tone, that ability to resonate with people right across the political spectrum. As you know, as Conservatives, I would say we always talk about the center right, but show people that we can be a conservative government that also just uses good old common sense and, of course, compassion when we make decisions.
Now, Rebecca, the UCP says it's a big tent party, but it appears to be a little fractured right now in that tent with a lot of animosity. What will it take to really unite the Conservatives once again here in Alberta?
That's a really good question, and it's one I get a lot. You know, it starts with our team. We have an amazing team of MLAs right across this province that are hardworking and smart and dedicated, and I know that they want to be united. And like many party members, I would say there were times where they felt like their voice just wasn't heard at the table. You know, and I would say when talking about my team, I spent a couple of days last week with your MLA, who is a strong voice for Lethbridge at the table, absolutely no question, Emily Newdorf. But, it's for me, it's building on the talents and strengths of the team. It's not about any one person. And so making sure that our team feels heard is priority number one. My other commitment was to travel to every single one of the 87 constituencies, knock on doors in every single riding, make sure that I'm meeting with every single CA board president and the volunteers to make sure that our grassroots party members know that in me, they will have somebody who will always listen and hear their concerns, hear where they're coming from. And I don't think that people expect to agree with every decision a government is going to make. Largely, the concerns sometimes are around how decisions have been made and how they're communicated. And so that's really the approach that I'm going to take.
Yeah, because some MLAs said, you know what, we're forced always to toe the party line. Our voices are not being heard. So how would you approach that problem and that issue as Premier of Alberta?
Yep. And, again, it does start with bringing our team together. And yes, we are a party. It's a party system. And I think there is always that question of, we are the party of different opinions. We value things like freedom of speech and diversity of thoughts and ideas. We want people to hold the values that they hold dear, and we respect those differences. Sometimes I joke that that's what makes conservative politics a little bit messy, but it's also one of the things that we need to continue to hold as one of our most important values. That said, we still have to show discipline. And so the question is, where do we have those discussions? How as a team can we come together and say, look, we are always going to value different opinions and different thoughts and different perspectives, but what, as a team, does discipline look like to us? And make sure that, we come to that as a team and know what is that line that we're not going to cross, and what's going to happen if that line is in fact crossed. And I think, largely speaking, people want to see that there's one set of rules for everybody. They don't want me to come and tell everybody what to do. That's not my approach. I'm not a top-down approach to leadership kind of person. But I think our team really does have to have that conversation around, what does discipline look like? Because we're going to need it as we head into the next election. How do we stay on message, on track, and still make sure everybody's voices are heard?
We don't know exactly what lies ahead with any future COVID-19 outbreaks, but everyone seems to have a different opinion on how this should really be handled. Are you in favor of vaccine mandates or lockdowns? Or are you the mindset that we should not see any more lockdowns in our province, which has really hurt small business owners?
I would say this. Throughout the pandemic, and I mean, those sitting on the sidelines or even those of us looking back now, hindsight is 2020, we learned a lot of things. We were faced with something that none of us ever could have expected and none of us had ever been through before. And I would say this, throughout especially the last couple of months of the pandemic, but with the various waves, and we saw obviously things changing from one wave to the next, we know a lot more now. We know that we have to address issues within our hospital system. We have to address capacity needs when it comes to the healthcare system. We've heard loud and clear, people want freedom of choice and autonomy over the decisions that they make. And I often, again, say we've spent, 2 years going through something very hard. We have been through something that has been so divisive, and I believe we should respect where people are coming from and focus on also the overall well-being and mental health of people. I mean, especially of kids. That's what I was working in before resigning to jump into this race. But we saw that the health restrictions had a very real impact, especially on kids and youth, but really Albertans right across the province. And, I think Albertans are looking for us to say, you know what, we hear you. We know that has had a significant impact, and we need to look at the issues around the healthcare system and hospital capacity to address future waves.
Now, you want to put in place what you refer to as affordability actions. The first one is the Alberta Activity Grant. What is this really all about?
That actually came out of the Child and Youth Wellbeing Review. We heard, again, health restrictions had an impact on kids and families. We need to prioritize the mental health and well-being of Albertans, especially of young kids, and help them get back into activities. I mean, whether that be piano or hockey or soccer or dance, things that kids are passionate about at a time where parents are really struggling with affordability. I mean, I think of when I was growing up, I had amazing parents and a wonderful family, but I remember my parents making those really tough decisions. And I know there are parents who lay awake at night thinking about how they are going to pay their electricity bills and put gas in their car, and also help get their kids in things that they can be passionate about, and that will improve their overall well-being and mental health. So, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we can control. We don't control financial, federal monetary policy, but we do control what we can do with this surplus and direct it in a way that goes directly to parents and kids, supports the choices they make. I believe in parent choice. And so as opposed to necessarily funding one program or the other, I think those dollars should go to parents to help them out with their kids and their families. And also on the details of what exactly that looks like, I said, that's something I want to take to caucus too. It's not all about me and my ideas. I want my colleagues to weigh in on exactly how we're going to do that. But I think affordability, and it's not just I think, that's the number one thing I hear right across the province. Mental health and well-being, that's important too. So that was one of our first commitments as well.
Now, you've also proposed to implement an Alberta small business tax holiday. How would that work?
Well, and that's been raised by a number of organizations. I know our business tax is low, but we also have to recognize that the last 2 years have been really hard on small businesses throughout the pandemic. I know that there's been a lot of uncertainty. And a lot of small business owners have said, look, my business really struggled over the last 2 years. I absolutely believe that these entrepreneurs are at the heart of the entrepreneurial spirit that we all talk about. These are folks that drive our economy. They hire people in our local communities right across the province. And I think starting with the 2% small business tax holiday is an excellent way to show them, first, that they're valued. Second, that we completely understand what they've been through in the last couple of years. But third, that they are absolutely vital to our province's economic growth and recovery.
Rebecca, let's chat about healthcare for just a moment here. What really needs to be done to change and increase physician availability, decrease wait times, and increase hospital bed capacity? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and the physician, the family doc situation is something I did hear a lot about in Lethbridge. I know the Minister of Health, Minister Copping, has been working really hard on that as well, just to attract new doctors. And I know your MLA Newdorf, has raised that as well, and was able to update a number of people on the number of doctors that are now signing contracts and coming to Lethbridge specifically. But this is an issue that we hear right across the province. We need to make sure, that we have access to family doctors either in or near your local community. And I grew up in super small town Saskatchewan, and so I know the struggles that people face in rural communities, and especially when it comes to access to healthcare. Primary care has to be a priority in terms of how we recruit physicians, coming up with innovative and unique ways to get more young people from rural communities getting into med school and coming back and serving as a family doc in their local community. I think there is a lot that can be done there. And working with different areas across the province, because the needs in Lethbridge may not be the same as in Bonnyville, for example, right? So we have a really good opportunity ahead of us to work with those communities and get more family docs in the system. I think that a lot of our answers, we obviously know that we've got a Ernst & Young report that identified a lot of kind of the red tape within the system. We know that we invest more than other provinces per capita, but yet we don't have better outcomes. I don't think we need more reports. I think, honestly, the answer lies with our frontline healthcare professionals. Doctors, nurses have identified not just middle management, but layers of bureaucracy and simple changes that could be made within the healthcare system to really focus on allowing frontline workers to do what they do best and really transform the thinking in our healthcare system around having the patient at the heart of it and not a process or policy.
Now, what about education? There's pressure from the teachers' union to change their curriculum, to decrease class sizes, to put less money into private schools, maybe even homeschooling. Which direction do you want to see our education system go?
Oh, that's a great question. I care a lot about education. I really do. My kids are 7 and 4. And I think right across this province, people want to make sure that we have a class education system for our kids. I believe in parent choice. I believe that, parents can make that best decision for them in terms of the type of education that works best for their child and for their family. And we need to maintain that. We have a long history in that front, no question. That said, I think curriculum, yes, there are a few things we've got great feedback on. English, math, financial literacy, those are all really great things, that we get a lot of positive feedback on. Continue moving in that path. There are some areas, though, where we missed the mark, and we need to rebuild some trust in that process and get some feedback and show parents and teachers across the province that we're listening. We've heard them, and that is definitely going to be a priority of mine. I also feel, one of the things I hear a lot is around class sizes, as you mentioned, and having teachers and kids in the classroom at the heart of the decisions we make and the funding decisions that are made. And we hear a lot about the government saying that school divisions have local authority, and school division saying government hasn't given us enough funding. I am a problem solver, first and foremost, creative problem solver. And I think we need to get to the table and look at, where's the money going? I mean, I'm from Calgary, as you mentioned, and, we have a school division that had a report that identified if we funded school divisions like others, or if the school division ran like some of the other major divisions, that we would have far lower class sizes. So my question is, how can we make sure that we're focusing on kids and teachers in the classroom? I made a commitment that I want to make sure we have more EAs hired. Absolutely. I think that helps with teachers, right? It helps bring down the stress level. It gives them some support in the classroom. It's good for kids, whether kids, that are struggling with mental health or struggling in class, or have unique or challenging needs. We need to make sure that those supports are there. And I also do want to pilot some very true wraparound services to address the mental health needs that really respects that schools are the hubs of a community. And for really vulnerable kids and families, that's going to be where they need to get those supports.
Rebecca Schultz is a candidate in the UCP leadership race. The party will be choosing its new leader on October the 6th. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me anytime.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.